Welcome to State Lobbying Heroes Podcast, a podcast where we delve into the careers and personal life stories of some of the best and the brightest state government relations experts. I'm your host, Deepak, CEO of Legistracker. Bob Kaylor grew up in Wilmington with no interest in politics. He was always passionate about sports and fascinated about history. He moved then to Greenville, East Carolina, to get his degree in political science. Bob also joined the active duty in Air Force as an intelligence officer serving in Vietnam. How did he then decide to get a law degree and then become a lobbyist? We talk about it in this next episode. Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's really an honor to have you here.
Well, thank you so much.
So now if I had to go back and let's say if you break it down since your childhood, you grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina. And as a child, were you always interested in politics? What got you into it?
Had no interest in politics. It was strictly sport.
Okay.
Played sports all the time, baseball, the summer, basketball. Had no real interest in politics at all.
Okay.
Growing up at that time in North Carolina, Wilmington was much smaller. It's about 50,000 people. And, we have the beach. We have a Wrightsville beach there.
Yeah.
But playing baseball all summer, the coaches never wanted us to go to the beach, so we didn't get to go to the beach that much because they said, if you sit on the beach all day, you'll wear yourself out and you'll be tired and you won't play well. But I do have I have a condominium at Wrightsville Beach now, so I still have a connection with that area. And I have some relatives that still alive live in that area.
Okay. So you're always interested in sports, basketball, and after you were in Wilmington, then you moved to Raleigh, am I right? For the East, where was East?
Well, I mean, my first move was to go to college, and I moved to Greenville to go to East Carolina.
Okay.
So I was in Greenville from 1962 to 67, basically, and then in the fall of 67, I went on active duty in the Air Force.
So in East Carolina University, you took political science as your major, am I right?
Yeah, I started out in history.
Okay.
And then my second year there, they created the political science department. So that was an interest. Well, you're right, in politics right then. But East Carolina had just opened a program in political science, a master's degree. And so I applied for it and got a teaching fellowship and taught political science for a year and worked on a thesis having to do with the domino effect in Southeast Asia, the communists, taking over from Vietnam, all of those countries. And that was sort of the thrust of what I was studying at that time. And then I went on active duty in the Air Force in the fall of 67, went out to Denver, Colorado, and then was involved in the intelligence community. So being an intelligence officer, I had access, especially in my last 2 years in Hawaii, to a lot of information about what was going on globally with obviously the war in Vietnam, but also with the Soviet Union and with China with regard to their weaponry and their space programs, things like that.
So what made you from high school and you moved into history? How did that switch happen?
I think it probably, I recognize that I wasn't a whiz at math and I didn't need to try to do any math programs.
Okay.
And history seemed like a logical thing to do. And I was, very fascinated with history. Always have been, still fascinated with I watch programs and read books with regard to English history, the tutors, the whole bit. I'm very fascinated by that. And so I think I'm a lot more verbal than math, oriented. So that was sort of a logical way to go at that time, I believe.
Got it. And your degree there in history and then political science eventually, I don't know how has that helped you shape who you are today? Has that been impactful? Because that was back then. I don't know. Now has the politics changed since what you've learned back then?
No, it's interesting that my thesis director was a professor named John East, Dr. John East, and he had a law degree and a PhD in political science. He's a brilliant man. He later became our U.S. Senator in North Carolina. And so I think at that time I was probably a little more liberal, and it was a challenge to have a professor who was much more conservative and would have debates, and I never could win because he was so much more knowledgeable than I was at the time. And I think what shapes me more than anything, what I would say is probably more important, is the fact that while I was there, I was playing baseball every day, year round, during the summers also. So we had baseball practice from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock every day. And I was taking ROTC, and ROTC was like another minor in terms of courses. And so to do all those things and graduate on time, and I had a really good average, it taught me discipline that you've got to work to get whatever you achieve. So I think that probably helped formulate who I am more than anything else. And I'd always, worked hard in school, even in high school. I always went to class. In college, I never skipped a class. I went to every class. I was also in a fraternity, president of my fraternity. They made me president when I was a sophomore because I didn't drink alcohol. I didn't drink any alcohol until after college. I was actually one of the first designated drivers because I could go pull up because I hadn't been drinking. So that's an interesting little sideline. Yeah. So all that I think helps formulate who you are. And so when after I didn't think I wanted to stay in the Air Force. I'd been there 4 years. I was an intelligence officer, and I looked around, and the officers who were in charge of the intelligence units at the time were typically former pilots or navigators, what's called in the Air Force rated officers. And so, the rated officers called us in the Air Force who didn't fly, called us strap hangers, meaning you ride to work on the bus and you hold on to the strap. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a semi-derogatory term. And so I figured out that if I was going to stay in the Air Force, I couldn't go that far. I'm not an academy graduate, but unless I probably had a background as a pilot or navigator. When I first went on active duty in the Air Force in 1967, I wore glasses, and you couldn't go to flight school if you didn't have perfect 20/20 vision at that time. So while I was there in Hawaii, and I'm working with a one-star general who was my boss, as my 4-year term was coming here, he wanted me to stay in the Air Force and go to flight school and become a pilot. And by that time, even though I was not 20/20, I had glasses, and you could get into flight school. But I wasn't prepared to do that, and I started thinking about a year before I was rotating out of the Air Force. So from, I guess, mid 1971 to 72, mid 1970, 71, I was thinking what I need to do. And I decided, maybe I want to be a lawyer, and I think I'll go to law school. So I took the LSAT at that time and did okay on that. I had really good grades, undergraduate and grad school, high grades. And so I applied to North Carolina. I applied to Duke University Law School in Wake Forest. My father at that time worked for a company that was owned by three gentlemen. One of them was a trucking company. One of them was a gentleman named Eddie Cameron. If you're familiar with Cameron Indoor Stadium at Duke University, that was Mr. Eddie Cameron. He was at one time the athletic director at Duke. And Mr. Cameron said to my dad, if Bob wants to go to law school, I can guarantee you he'll get into Duke. So I was accepted at Duke, and I was accepted at North Carolina. But I was paid for it at that time. And at that time, the tuition at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill was $350 a semester, $700 a year. Duke University lost $3,500, and that was a huge difference. And so I went to North Carolina. I'm glad I went there. I met a lot of people. Some of my best friends that are still best friends were in the same law class. A lot of people who came to Raleigh out of that 1974 class. Ed Finley, who used to be chairman of the Utilities Commission, was in my class. We had a very impressive class of people that came over here and did various things. I'm one of the few that's still going full time in terms of all those people that graduate. Joanne Sanford, who used to be the chair of the Utilities Commission, she's still very active. She was a year behind me in class of 75. I think I just decided I needed to do something. I have an aptitude for reading things and analyzing things, and law school seemed to be the natural way to go. So that's why I applied for and went to law school at Chapel Hill.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for your service. I didn't know that you were part of active duty. So while you said you've flown to Southeast Asia, and how long were you there before you came back to do your law degree?
I was stationed in the base in Northeast Thailand from July 68 to July 69. And I'm a briefing officer. I was a second lieutenant in the Air Force, and I was briefing pilots coming in, and they were going out. These pilots some of them were called forward air controllers. They had very strict rules of bombing in Laos because they had friendlies on the ground. So I'd have to give them coordinates of where they were looking to blow up ammunition dumps and things like that. And I'd have to tell them the other planes that were coming in that had various types of ordnance bombs and whatever. and so that they knew how to rendezvous. And I'd brief them. I'd go in at 4:30 in the morning and worked until, like there were 16-hour days. That's all we did. And so I'd been there for about a month, and I'm briefing these pilots about what to look for, and flying mainly in Laos, not in North Vietnam. And they would say, well, you haven't been out there. You don't know what it looks like. And I said to my boss, who was a major, well, what do I have to do to fly missions with these guys? They said, well, to be in combat missions, you have to have gone to a survival school. So I said, well, how do I do that? They said, no problem. We can cut you orders. So they cut me orders, and I flew to the Philippines, Clark Air Base, and I went to a jungle survival school for 10 days. I came back, and then I flew missions with the pilots who were putting in airstrikes. And I flew, I don't know, 15 to 20 missions, which helped my credibility in terms of briefing these pilots who were going out and making these strikes and everything. And I flew in the helicopters. I flew in the rescue helicopters. I flew in the planes who were putting in ordnance. I mean, not the ordnance. They were directing jets to come in and make their bombing runs. And then I flew in some other planes that flew at night and who illuminated, the trail, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I don't know if you are familiar with the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but this was a network where supplies were coming from North Vietnam around the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, through Laos and then back into South Vietnam. And we had a bombing interdiction campaign to try to block that flow of material coming down that trail every night. And we bombed them around the clock for years, hoping we could stop the flow of material coming out of North Vietnam into South Vietnam to supply the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. So it's a whole big war effort. And when at the end of that year, when I went to Hickam Air Base in Hawaii, I was still briefing on that whole thing. I still had all the clearances to read all the documents and everything for another 2 years. So I was really involved in the Vietnam War for pretty much 3 years. Only 1 year there, but 2 years following up after that.
That's really amazing to hear this.
And another thing that helped me a lot is when I was briefing a 4-star general. And they tell you very quickly, you learn very quickly, when you're standing in front of a line of generals, you got a 4-star at the end and a bunch of other generals on each side of the table, and you're looking right at this general, and you're doing these briefing. We had a rear projector type thing in those days for slides. People in the back room would pop up my slide, and I would speak from it. But you learn very quickly that when a general asks you a question, you either know the answer or you don't know the answer. You don't guess. You don't fudge. You simply say, sir, I don't have an answer to that, but we'll get back to you as soon as you can. That's one of the best lessons that you'll ever learn, and it applies for a lobby. You never, ever say anything that you're not sure of, and you always, if you don't know the answer, you say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get the answer and get back to you as soon as I can. So that was one of the best lessons that I learned for doing those briefings for 2 years, and I did 2 briefings a week for 2 years to that general.
That is an excellent insight you bring in. I was about to ask you, what was the one lesson you learned from your experience being in active duty, and you kind of answered that right off the bat. So
yeah, that was the most important, that you're straightforward. You only talk about what you know about. You don't get out of your lane. And if you don't know the answer to something, you simply say, I don't know the answer to that, but we will try to get you an answer as quickly as we can. The same with lobbying now. When I lobby, I go up and talk to a member. I only talk about what I know. I don't represent what others. I might tell a member when I'm lobbying on the bill, this is my position, but you need to know that others have this position, but you'll have to ask them why they take that position. And over time, the only thing that you have, the main thing, probably the only thing you have going for you as a lobbyist is your credibility and your trustworthiness. And you never say anything that you're not sure of, and you always answer directly. And if you don't know the answer, you tell them, you'll get back to them as soon as you can with an answer. And if you ever mislead a member, I think it becomes very difficult for you to be a successful lobbyist.
No, thank you for that insight. So in law, once you were in law, was there any specific course you were kind of interested in, or was it general law you were trying to aim for?
No, I took the general courses that you would take. I didn't take, I guess you could have gone into accounting or something like that. I've gotten another degree in accounting, but when I graduated and I had my second year in law school, I'd gotten an internship to work with the North Carolina Attorney General at the time. So I was in Chapel Hill, came over to Raleigh, and I worked that summer as an intern. The Attorney General at that time was Robert Morgan, and Robert Morgan, I'm looking at my diploma from East Carolina. He was actually chairman of the board of trustees at East Carolina, so he had signed my diploma at East Carolina, and so he was the Attorney General. And I went to work over there when I graduated from law school in the fall of 1974. And I only worked for him for about, well, let me back up. At the end of that summer, starting into my third year at law school, they contacted me, the Attorney General's office, and offered me a position to come to work with them. So that was the result of having been an intern there. And I had a couple of other opportunities, but that seemed to be the right thing to do. So I came to Raleigh. I came to Raleigh in the fall of 1974, and after I passed the bar. And Robert Morgan that year stepped down in the fall to run for the U.S. Senate in North Carolina. And Jim Holshouser was the governor. He was a Republican. Morgan was a Democrat. Holshouser appointed Jim Carson, I believe, to be the interim Attorney General. And so then he ran against Rufus Edmondson. I don't know if you know that name. Rufus Edmondson became the Attorney General, took office in January of 75. So I worked for Rufus Edmondson as the Attorney General until I left, I believe, in June of 76 to go into private practice. But while there with the Attorney General's office, I did a lot of trials. I did some very big trials having to do with highway condemnation. I was one of a team of 3 lawyers in Charlotte in 1975. The Department of Transportation condemned the original McDonald's in Charlotte on Independence Avenue. And so we had to go down and try that case. And the way the condemnation law works in North Carolina is that it's a quick take statute. The Department of Transportation can take your property and they can start building on it. And then if you disagree with what they say it's worth, then you go have a hearing, a trial to determine how much you should be paid for your property. So this was the purpose of that trial because the lawyers representing McDonald's, and McDonald's had a unique setup in those days. They had one person who owned the franchise, one person who owned the land, and another person who leased the land. So you had 3 different people fighting for the money. And we tried that case. I tried that case for about a week or more. And I do remember standing up in front of the jury and saying that, you've heard a lot about McDonald's this last week, and I'm going to do you a favor. I'm not going to start singing "You Deserve a Break Today," the old McDonald's song at that time. And anyway, we did very well. We did very well in terms of the verdict. And generally in condemnation cases, I've learned this: when landowners are seeking more money, the jury tends to find out if that landowner is being too greedy and wants too much. And somehow they seem to come to a fair result, although those who represent property owners will probably disagree. But at any rate, that was a very interesting trial. I tried another major case with a highway construction claim that took us some time to try. So I was really into doing trial work. And those cases, the condemnation cases, were with the jury. The highway construction cases were with just a judge and not a jury. It's the way the statute's set up. But when I left there and went into private practice with a firm that did mainly insurance defense work, I did a lot of trial work and I did a lot of workers' comp hearings for a couple of years. And then when I was actually hired to come in-house with Carolina Power and Light, the general counsel at that time wanted me to take charge of the claims section because there would be claims against Carolina Power and Light for damages or things like that. And they wanted me to be the litigator doing those things in Superior Court. But I was only there in my first 6 months. And at that time, 1981, 82, Carolina Power and Light had a general rate case at the Utilities Commission. And the lawyer who was head of the department asked me to help. I started helping doing those hearings. And then I realized that was a lot more important than doing claims, in terms of auto accidents and telephone poles being bent. And so I started specializing in doing that. So for the next 10 years, when I was in-house with Carolina Power and Light, I did those rate hearings. My son is 32. His birthday was May 17th. And I pulled up the transcript from the hearing in 1988 when the Harris nuclear power plant that was the main topic of the hearing that year. And the hearing lasted 12 weeks. It was a $3.8 billion project at that time. And my son was born. I'd finished cross-examining the witness, and I went to found out my wife had been taken to the hospital by our neighbor, and my son was born during the night. And the next morning in the hearing room, which was May 18th, 1988, the chairman at that time said, "Mr. Kaylor, I believe we have a new addition to your family." And he said, "I believe you have a boy." I said, "Yes, that's right." He said, "Well, this hearing has lasted so long. I hope you don't have another child before this hearing is over." And I said, "I agree with you. This has been traumatic, but it's not nearly as traumatic as being in the labor room and watching your child be born." So, and I'll tell you one other case about a major trial that I was involved in. So I had left Carolina Power and Light in 1991. I was back in private practice, and I was with a firm, and that firm had a big case going on in Johnson County, which is Smithfield, and it was a hog odor nuisance case. The plaintiffs who lived around this farm contending that the three barns that we each had 850 hogs brought odor to them and was a nuisance. And so that firm asked me when I got with them if I would help try that case. And so we go down to Smithfield, North Carolina, Johnson County to try the case. And the plaintiff's lawyer representing the property owner suing my landowner was none other than Robert Morgan, who had been the U.S. Senator, our Attorney General, who'd signed my diploma. And we tried that case for 2 weeks in Johnson County. It was on court TV. They recorded it every day, and then later they did a 2-hour version on court TV. And after it was over, I got a call from a friend out in California. He said, "I'm sitting here watching court TV, and you're standing before this jury talking about hog odor." But that was in the summer of 1996, and we won that case, and the jury said that we were not a nuisance. So and that was the last jury trial I've been involved in, because you can't do work as an administrative agency like the Utilities Commission and work in the General Courts of Justice, because the General Courts of Justice, Superior Court, District Court, they have priority over your schedule. So you might have a big hearing at the Utilities Commission, which is an administrative hearing, and if you had a trial in Superior Court, you'd have to go do the Superior Court trial. So that was my last trial that I did in 1996. And I told friends that if I could convince 12 people in Johnson County that hog poop didn't stink, I needed to retire from doing trial work. So that was my last trial.
That is fantastic. So if you had to take all of that experience you had as a trial lawyer, what was the one thing which you learned which currently helps you in lobbying? Is being a lawyer, I know I've heard, I've talked to a couple of lobbyists, and they don't say, some of them have the law experience, they went to school in law, and some of them don't. So can you tell us, in the listeners, whether being a lawyer, is that important to be a lobbyist, or do you think you don't have to be?
I don't think you have to be. There are a lot of very smart lobbyists who are not lawyers. I think that the only slight benefit you might get as a lobbyist, also having a law degree in practice, is that for some reason, people seem to think that because you're a lawyer, you understand things quicker, and you can digest them quicker, especially when you're dealing with a statute. I don't think that's true at all. I think at times, though, working on bills and being very under time crunch and doing things, having a law degree does help you, because you're able to look things up and figure out language that might be appropriate. So I think it gives you a little bit of an edge when you're under a time crunch and someone's asking you to look at some language and asking you, does this conflict with existing law? And so you're looking at a general statute and you're looking at language. But I think that's only a slight advantage, because there are a lot of very bright people and smart people that lobby and pick up things very quickly. So I think there was a perception at time going back that a law degree gave you somewhat of an advantage, but I'm not sure which advantage that is. I think the best advantage is being prepared, working hard, understand your bill, and the most important thing about lobbying is actually arranging to talk to members and going to see them, rather than sitting around at a table and talking to a bunch of other lobbyists at the same time. So that's my observation. And I'm a little different lobbyist in that I'm not a full-time lobbyist. I'm not in the building every day, all day, because I'm still practicing law. I'm still representing Duke, Dominion, and others at the Utilities Commission in hearings. And I'm only in and out of the legislative building when I need to be there to work on a bill or to go lobby someone. So a lot of our lobbyists are down there all day, every day, and that's what they do. So I'm sort of in and out. I go down to the building when I have to meet someone, or if I have to go to a committee. Of course, we're not going down at all now because of the COVID-19. But I think starting this week, I'm going to start spending a little more time going down to the building. So yeah, I think I think the best thing that I can say to any person wanting to get into this field is you've got to understand your product. Just like you're a salesperson, you've got to understand what your bill does. You've got to understand the counter to it and those who are opposed to it and why they're opposed. And you've got to go and work hard and meet with members and explain to them why they should or should not vote for your bill. And I can say this, there's been a real change in the General Assembly over the past less than 10 years, maybe the past 3 or 4 sessions. At one time, going back even 10 years ago, it was easier to be a lobbyist because you could actually go to a committee head and explain your bill, and you had a good chance of that member saying, okay, we're going to move that bill, and I understand it. Last session, I think it was a very high percentage. It might have been 60 or 70% of members that have been in the General Assembly less than one term. So you've got a lot of new people that you have to meet. And it's work to go out. Very comfortable if you've been lobbying for years to go to the people that you know and they know you. But you have to really go out and meet the new people and explain who you are, who you represent, and why you're there. And it's actually in the last 2 years, it's become much harder to get in a door and get in a meeting because a lot of the new members want you to make reservation, reserve a time for them. They want you to send them the stuff in advance. Whereas the way we used to work, I would see a member walking down the hall and say, Senator so-and-so, I got Senate Bill, blah, blah. Here's what it does. He'd say, okay, I'm with, because you've been around them and they know you. And the members rely on lobbyists to tell them because they can't read everything. And they rely on lobbyists to tell them what the bill's about and why they should be for it and why they should be against it and what they need to understand in terms of those on the other side of the bill. So it's become, I think in the last 6 years, it's a much harder, I think, profession in North Carolina because a lot of newer members and you have to work hard. And sometimes I'm not sure I work that hard. I try to meet the new members. And when I work on a team and we have a bill, my Duke Energy client, we divide up and I try to always take some new members that I haven't met to go and introduce myself and work with them, whatever our message is.
And so now that you're working part-time, how do you allocate your time? Where do you get your sources of information from? And how do you make sure that you wanted to get something done? How do you allocate your time in terms of, okay, let me go and meet this person rather than do something else? How do you prioritize?
Well, the clients I have now, we generally have a coalition of several lawyers, and we work with the state chamber also, and most of my clients do. So we tend to, we meet every week, and if we're working on a bill, we decide what our message is, and then we decide who should go talk to whom. So I would volunteer that I know this member, I know this representative, or I know this senator, or I need to get to know this person. And so I know that I've got to arrange to be down there and meet with them and talk with them and explain why they should vote for or against whatever I'm advocating. And so you just sort of do it. It's like you don't have to plan for anything. I mean, I read every day on the General Assembly website the bills introduced. We get, as you work with a team, you get messages back and forth. Check out this bill. What do you think about this bill? How does it affect us? And so you just sort of, it's just like what you do reading the paper. You do these things every day. You look at the new bills, you look at committees, you look who's on the committee, and you figure out when those committees are going to meet and how much time. Generally, that's sort of dictated by the bill itself and the number of people that might be working on your team, to get that. And in the past, I've had bills that I was the only lobbyist working on. And so I had to go and do it myself and figure out how to get to a whole committee and meet with enough people to make sure they understood, why it was important to either vote for or against a particular bill.
What kind of sources of information do you currently keep an eye on? Are you tracking something in terms of Twitter or anything to get your pieces of information?
I don't know. The younger people are much more adept at Twitter and Instagram and all that. I do have members that I'll call and talk to them. I go by offices. The legislative assistants are invaluable to get to know them. They can help you, at least, scheduling meetings and things like that. I do subscribe to the Insider, so I get their reports. And But the General Assembly now is their website is getting better every day. So they show you every day the bills that were introduced and action on bills.
Yes.
So it's getting a little easier to track bills. And then my clients also, they keep a matrix of bills, and they send information to me to keep your eye on this particular bill. Let me know what you think about this bill. What do we need to do? Who do we need to go see? So that's sort of how that works. And I'll tell you one interesting story about me and working on the bill. This goes back to about, I think, 2015. And I got a call from my Dominion contact late in the session about a problem that Dominion had, whereby they had overpaid their federal income tax for several years in a row, going back to, I think, 2009, somewhere in there. And as a result of paying their federal income tax to the IRS, they overpaid their North Carolina income tax. And it had to do with the ratio of customers in Virginia versus North Carolina. They had filed an appeal with the IRS to get a refund, and it was protracted. It lasted several years. I think around 2013, the Fourth Circuit agreed with Dominion and told the IRS that they had to refund money. And it was a lot of money. So Dominion then contacted the North Carolina Department of Revenue and said that we need a refund here. And the North Carolina Department of Revenue, their statute had a provision having to do with a statute of limitation, meaning you have to file your claim by a certain date. And they said you didn't file your claim within 6 months of the final action of the IRS. They said, well, we filed it within 6 months of the final federal action, which was the court of the Fourth Circuit's opinion. And the North Carolina Department of Revenue said, no, the last action was the IRS rejecting your claim years earlier. So we had to get an amendment to the bill to make it so that, and the way it worked is, if the North Carolina Department of Revenue at that time said, if you haven't met the statute, you don't even get a hearing. So we didn't even have access to administrative hearing. Had Dominion tried to go into Superior Court, more than likely the court would have said you haven't exhausted your administrative remedy, so therefore you can't come into Superior Court. So we had to try to get the statute changed to allow us to have at least an opportunity to appear before the agency. So I had a bill ready, an amendment to a bill, and it was about the last week of the session that year in Senate Finance. And I had a member who was going to offer this amendment for me. And we're at the meetings last generally 1 hour. So we're coming to the end of the meeting, and my member's not there. And I'm in a panic mode because we're in the last week of session. And I go to another new member and ask him if he could at least introduce my amendment. And he said, I'm sorry, Bob, I haven't got time to read it. And so about that time, before my member walks in who's going to do the amendment, the chair said, well, we have one more item that we need to do. Bob Kaylor has an amendment. And everybody, all the lobbyists jump up and look around. He's not a member. How can he have an amendment? And everybody looks at me, and they all look back at me. And then my member walks in, and he put the amendment in. Eventually, we got the bill passed. And eventually, Dominion went before the administrative hearings. They went to court. And about last year, they got a huge refund based on all that. So that was an interesting day. Bob Kaylor has an amendment we need to take up. Yeah. Lobbyists get credited with having an amendment very often.
That's awesome. So given all your experience, tremendous experience you had, if there was one thing you would like to advise the upcoming lobbyists, what would it be?
Well, if you're trying to break in to be a lobbyist, I think probably the only route now, one of maybe a very few routes to do it, is to try to go to work with a firm that's doing lobbying and needs young people to come in and sit in on committee meetings for them. And there are firms that are hiring every year. They hire even interns. And you might start out as an intern. You might start as an intern working for a member. That's a good way to get in the building and understand how the process works. So many of our lobbyists started out working as interns for a member, either on the House or Senate side, and eventually they decided to join a firm. Some of these larger firms are always hiring young people to go and to be there to sit in on every committee meeting and report back. And that's probably the main way that you could actually get into the business now. Because if you came to Raleigh and you're just by yourself and you want to be a lobbyist, unless you have a family connection or a business connection, how do you get a client? I mean, you could actually enter the profession if you were associated with a family that had a need for lobbyists, or those are the kind of things that I think I've seen happen every now and then. But generally, the younger people or the new people tend to come in and they associate with a firm or with a law firm that has a consulting practice, or with a a group of lobbyists that need someone to help them. So I think it's tough to get into the business now, and often have people call me and give me a call. They're referred by someone. Are you looking for someone? And I say, well, unfortunately, I'm not. It's just me. Just me and my firm, and just me. And I can handle what I need to do. If I needed some help, I would definitely ask you to be involved. But I tend to be able to do what I do on my own now.
Thank you for that advice. Any final thoughts or words before we conclude? The floor is open to you, whether if you want to talk about yourself or your firm. It's all up to you.
No, I mean, I don't advertise or anything. It's just me. I have set clients. I'm an AV rated lawyer. I don't know if you know what that means. That's the highest rating, and I've been AV rated for some time, going back into early '90s, I think.
Wow.
Lawyers are rated by A is A and V, and A and V is the highest rating you can have. And I've been listed in best lawyers and all those kind of things. But I enjoy doing what I do. People say, how can you enjoy being down there and talking to these people? Well, there are a lot of really good people in the building. There are a lot of good people that work for the legislators. There are a lot of good people that, just the staff down at Sergeant at Arms. I know some of those people very well. They're friends, and it's a good experience, especially when you work on something and you see it come to fruition and you get a bill passed, and it helps someone. So it's very rewarding from my point of view. And I've only had, in all the years I've been down there, just a few incidents where it was not pleasant, to deal with someone on the other side because they misrepresented things. And there was something that I worked on last year where there was a lot of misrepresentation, which was not very pleasant. But you move on, because when you misrepresent, in the long run, it doesn't help you. It'll come back. The main thing that I've learned is to be straightforward and be honest. And as long as you make sure you're being honest and you're telling what you know, or you're providing what you know, you should be okay as a lobbyist in North Carolina. And other people have asked me about, well, have you ever thought about going to Washington, D.C., the federal lobby? I said, absolutely not. North Carolina is all I need. I'm very content. I often have people ask me, and over the years, different firms have tried to ask me to join the firm because they see my book of business. And I'm 76, and they say, well, how much longer are you going to do this? And my pat answer is, I'm going to keep doing it as long as I go to my mailbox and there's a check in there other than my Social Security check. If the only check is my Social Security check, I know it's time to hang it up. So.
Words of wisdom. Thank you so much, Bob, for taking the time to spend it with me. I really do appreciate it. I know it was very quick, short notice I gave you, and you said, yes, I really do appreciate your time. And
I've enjoyed it.
It was truly my honor to spend time with Bob Kaylor and learn about his profound career. Thanks for listening to the show. Remember, yours and your family's health should be the number one priority during these turbulent times. So until next time, take care.